Okay. Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed your beverage of choice. Just before we carry on, I'd like to let you know what's happening in the near future. On Tuesday, the week after next, Tuesday the 28th, is our monthly social, which is at the Wellington, isn't it at the moment, Peter?
Yeah.
That's right. Wednesday the 5th, members will be interested or not in the fact it's our AGM. On the 7th to the 9th, the British Humanist Association has its annual conference in Leeds this year, which promises to be a good event. If you go to the BHA website, you can find out about that. On the 11th, Thursday the 11th, no, that's July. Let's go back to June. Wednesday the 12th of June, the Birmingham Skeptics in the pub, their next meeting, I should mention that because I helped to organise it. It's Johnny Scaramanga, who is somewhat well known for having gone to a very Christian religious school, and now having become an atheist. His talk is about what it's like being in a Christian school, where you're taught creationism and such like. On the 21st is our next meeting here, which is a discussion event, What Humanism Means to Me, where I and some other members will give a short talk about what we think humanism is, and we can have a discussion. That's a good meeting both for members and for newcomers who are interested in finding out what it's all about. And then going quickly into July, Birmingham Salon have their next meeting, which is on Thursday the 11th, the EU and the End of Politics, with James Hartfield, the writer, and Holly Smith from Snaith, from Aston University. Again, like there's Birmingham Humanists Facebook page, there's also a Birmingham Salon Facebook page you might like to have a look at, because they have very good events. And finally, we're having a meeting on the 16th of July here about humanist ceremonies. It's in the news at the moment because we're trying to persuade Parliament to allow people to be married in humanist ceremonies without having to have a separate civil ceremony as well. So in other words, to put humanism on a par with religious organisations who don't... If you have a church wedding, you don't have to go to the register office afterwards, which you do at the moment with a humanist wedding. Okay, sorry for about a little advertising of different events. And to get back to our sheep, it's time to carry on. Now, Stephen left us hanging about what the next step would be for a liberal in education. So I'll pass you back to Stephen to fill in that important part of the puzzle.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but we don't just want to hear from me. So, so just where did we get to? I can't even remember myself now. So this is really where we got to. I busted some myths, and I explained why I think certain arguments against being a liberal with a capital L when it comes to moral and religious education are no good. But I haven't given you any case for being liberal with a capital L. I mean, why should we encourage young people to be independent, autonomous, critical thinkers, particularly when it comes to morality and religion? Why think that that's a good thing to do? Might there not be dangers attached to that? What do you think? Let's have some feedback. What kind of argument might we give for encouraging autonomous critical thinkers? I mean, why would that be a good idea? Actually, you got any idea?
Isn't critical thinking the way to progress knowledge in a reliable way? I'm just saying in general, they should encourage the question things. And I do think that's it. Again, I do think that morality has got distinctive basis for it. So that's my little comment.
Yeah. I mean, you might think, well, we know what's true, and if you let them make their own minds, they might come to a wrong judgment and go down some very dark turns, and then where we're going to be. So it would be much better, all things considered, if we just kind of get them to believe what we want them to believe one way or another. Let's not allow too much leeway because of the risks attached to that. With this lady at the back.
We don't know what's true, because 40, 50 years ago, the interracial relationship was wrong. So, because morality evolves, it's necessary for critical thinking to evolve for morality to evolve.
We have made moral, well, let's hope it's moral progress. I mean, I think we all really believe this, don't we? It's not just that morality is different now in terms of, our attitudes to gay people and women and so on. No, it is better. These are significant moral improvements which have come in large measure as a result of people being allowed to think and question and make up their own minds. We don't want to entirely. You need to give some credit to religion, because actually it has often been religious people that have been in the front line very often in the fight against slavery and so on. But they were religious people who were very liberal with a capital L. That was what marked them out. So if we want to make moral progress, you might say we all need to be on board with the project in terms of thinking and questioning. Sorry?
I was listening to Book of the Week on Radio 4 about talking about tribal societies. He was talking about at what stage do various societies kill or help their elderly residents die. And it's basically about resource allocation.
Oh, yes.
And how many resources you have. And therefore, in some societies where you couldn't carry a lot of resources, there wasn't many, it was quite normal for you to have a village killer who would go and kill the older person. And the older person would do this, it was their duty. They would get bumped off because you couldn't carry him.
Yes.
In other societies where it was abundant, they would be looked after, and in fact they would dictate the entire society up until the moment that they were dead. What was to go in the laws, who could marry, whatever, because they were the oldest and wisest. He says the West is somewhere in the middle, but with an ageing population and decreasing resources, we're seeing the slow move towards the more ruthless. I mean, I can make an argument that when I get older, it would be the moral thing for me to commit suicide to give as many resources to my children as possible. Why should I bleed them dry? On the other hand, I could argue a moral question. I have a right to life. I'm an independent person. I think both fair moral arguments.
Yeah, but how does that point? Just very interesting.
It's the British argument, isn't it? They would argue that life is sacred no matter what, and therefore you shouldn't kill anybody, even if they are draining resources dry and all the little kids are starving in the street.
That sounds right, though, doesn't it?
Well, does it?
You seem to be. You seem to be making a case for let's just stick with nice, strict religious truths, because otherwise we're going to end up dropping drainage.
I will probably commit suicide to release resources for my children, because that makes sense.
Would you like some help?
Oh, yes. But, it depends on what I feel like when I get there. I don't know.
Let me briefly give you some. See if you can. I'll give you some arguments for being liberal, and you can shoot them down if you like. Because they may not be very good. Not all of my arguments are brilliant, unfortunately. So here are some. See what you think. So you might say, we all need some immunity to bullshit. Right? Because, we live in a marketplace of ideas. There's no getting away from that. It's not like, we live in a totalitarian, religious or some other state where there's just a single set of ideas. We all sign up to it. No, we are actually living in a marketplace in which there are all sorts of competing ideas. And we need to be able to sift the wheat from the chaff. We need that kind of skill. And we're only going to have that skill if we're raised to be autonomous critical thinkers. That's how we will be able to resist being seduced by people who are perhaps very good at rhetoric and psychological manipulation, perhaps being seduced by them to go down some very dark and dangerous paths, in order to have at least some immunity to that kind of seductive nonsense, snake oil. We need to have good critical thinking skills, and that's one reason why we need to raise kids to be autonomous critical thinkers. What about that as an argument? Has that got any validity to it, do you think? Yeah?
I think that you cannot assume that children can automatically be critical thinkers. They need to be equipped with ideas, with notions, in order to be able to then
Okay. Carry on.
I don't agree with the categorical approach of ideas.
I don't.
The variety is innate, but it is.
I stand by that. Because we've seen other species. So if we've seen amongst chimpanzees sharing in certain studies, as opposed to...
I don't think you can actually use the term morality in relation to chimpanzees. It's an entirely different.
Let's not get into an argument about. I think that we. I mean, I'm personally persuaded that there is some.
I mean, that's
biological
what occurred in the first place. If there was no morality that was unifying people together, we would not survive and get out of the Rift Valley in Africa.
Well, in fact,
there must be some...
Yeah, well, the argument is that it's evolutionary, isn't it? It's about self-interest. I help you, and I look after you, because a time will come when I will need your help.
Yes.
So we work together. It's morality because I'm being kind to you. But I'm not. All morality, you can argue, is actually selfishness disguised.
Yes.
It's always everything's about bigger and bigger, bigger, great.
Hang on a minute. Because I think this gentleman, what's your name? Sorry? Chrissy. Might have been making a slightly different point as well, which is there's a very common and popular criticism of the Enlightenment, and in particular of Kant. You mentioned the categorical imperative, which is one of Kant's famous thoughts, that with Kant and the Enlightenment, when Kant was once asked what is Enlightenment, and he said, sapere aude, think for you, dare to think, dare to question, think for yourself, be an autonomous individual who applies your own intelligence. Don't just defer to authority. Don't go to the priests and just listen to what they say. Make up your own mind. That was how Kant understood enlightenment. And I'm a huge fan of the Enlightenment, but there are many religious conservatives who secretly hate it. They won't criticise it in a very obvious way, but they will often express their discontent to each other in a slightly coded way. And they will talk about the work of Alistair McIntyre, for example, and they will say things like, yes, but Kant thought that you could conjure the rabbit of morality out of the hat of reason. All by itself. If you just leave a child to think, bingo, the morality will just appear spontaneously from scratch out of nothing. And that's just not true. That can't happen. In fact, it's only from within a tradition that you can even think and reason. Reason itself belongs to a tradition, comes from a particular tradition, and so we need inevitably to be rooted in a tradition, and children need to be rooted in a tradition in order before they can even begin to think properly for themselves. And that's why, and that's exactly the kind of argument that, say, Jonathan Sacks, the chief rabbi, will give for saying that children need to be basically religiously indoctrinated. He gives that kind of excuse. He's not a big fan of the Enlightenment. He doesn't like Kant. He cites thinkers like McIntyre in order to justify moving back in the direction of a fairly conservative model. And I thought maybe that's what you were sort of alluding to there. So that sort of is it, or
sort of? But I'm not meaning specifically to do with teaching morality. I mean teaching in general, really. Is understanding. I mean, for instance, you can't teach science without sort of taking certain ideas on faith. You can't teach Einstein's theory of relativity, for instance, without just saying,
yes,
and this is the nature of light. If there's too much questioning, well, why is light like that? As adults, we have to say, well, we can't answer all your questions now. You just have to accept this for now, so that you can understand this, and then later on, you will be better equipped actually to then engage in genuine critical debate rather than what seems to pass for critical debate these days, which is really more awareness raising, which is I've worked in schools and a lot of the approach of getting the kids to question everything, and they're not ready for it. And essentially they end up reproducing what is expected of them rather than genuinely.
No, I think there's certainly a danger to that, and sometimes And you know, sometimes what passes for philosophy in the classroom turns out to be just a sort of stream of consciousness with people without any real rigour to it and so on. But it's certainly true that in science, that, you know, there are certain bits of terminology basically that you just need to master and just accept that that's just what the word means, and just take this as read and then we'll move on. Perhaps we'll come back and talk about this later on, but for the time being, just take it as read. I mean, clearly that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say, isn't it, in the science classroom? No one wants to deny that. However, when it comes to things like religion and morality, I think religion and morality are a bit different to science, for reasons I might spell out a bit later on. But what's particularly important, I think, is that when it comes to basic moral questions and positions, that you don't have to be questioning everything all of the time. You couldn't possibly do that. But it's a good idea to have a space where certain very basic beliefs can be questioned. Why not have that? What would be the problem with that? That doesn't mean that you can't then go on and do the other things too. But why not make a space available for discussion of some of the things that perhaps we've all just been taking for granted within a particular classroom, particularly when it comes to morality and religion. And one argument you might make for doing that is that when you encourage children to think and question in that kind of way, when people have run, for example, philosophy for children classes, there do appear to be all sorts of educational benefits. There's growing evidence that the children become measurably more intelligent as a result. The ethos of the school often appears to improve. There's less bullying, for example. The whole educational ethos improves. Now, to some extent, what supports this is anecdotal evidence, but it's not just anecdotal. There's evidence. There's other evidence now which is building up, which seems to suggest that it's a really good idea educationally to get kids to be thinking about these kind of questions, these most fundamental questions, to be given that kind of opportunity. So why not do it then? And the point that you're making doesn't really seem to me to be an argument against doing it, given that there are these potential benefits. But perhaps the most important reason for just being very liberal in the way that this gentleman was raised is that when research was done into the backgrounds of people that rescued Jews during the Holocaust, right? It's often said, oh, the people that rescued Jews were religious people, which is true, because everybody was religious back then, right? Was it religion that really motivated rescuers? But it turns out that no, it wasn't. That had some small effect. Samuel Oliner, who wrote a book called The Altruistic Personality, found when they looked at the backgrounds of the rescuers was that they tended to be raised in a non-authoritarian way. They tended to be raised to think and question and have empathy with other people and feel that they themselves had some autonomy rather than they were just passive pawns, if you like. That was what marked out rescuers from non-rescuers. So it seems to me that if you want to immunise young people against the great moral catastrophes that marred the 20th century, one of the most important things you can do is to raise them to be free-thinking, autonomous individuals. That is your best bet. Yeah, some of them may go wrong, but as a general strategy, that is much, much safer than raising them to be passive, uncritical thinkers. Because although they might do the right thing whilst the person telling them what to do tells them to do the right thing, when someone else comes along and tells them to do the wrong thing, they'll do that instead because they have no inner moral compass. They have no ability to actually sift the wheat from the chaff, to figure out what is actually true. They are putty in the hands of malign authorities. And it seems to me that, religion has a pretty poor track record of producing people like that, and that's exactly what we don't want. So that would be I think that's probably my main argument, actually, for being liberal as a capital R. Yes?
Would you not agree that about 95% of good behaviour in children is simply following example? And the example set by all those regardless of critical thinking and all this importance, obviously. But vast majority.
Yeah, that gets a whole chapter in my book, actually. Well, I can't. Sorry, why haven't I what?
I was just thinking, why didn't you bring the whole collection?
Because I haven't got
Because
any
people
copies.
buy them, read
I know, I've made a big mistake there. I should have done. It's available on Amazon. Yeah, there's a whole chapter on. There's a big movement in the United States called character education, and it was a big program under George Bush, George W, who really got behind it. And the key thought really goes back to perhaps Aristotle, and also I think it's like William James, who put emphasis on getting people to get into good habits. That's the great flywheel of society. That's what keeps people on the straight and narrow. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. If you want people to be good, you don't want them to think too much. You just want to get them in the groove so that they will then naturally and spontaneously carry on in the same direction. So it's not about thinking, it's about habit. And that's what schools need to be doing. So ultimately, we do want to be controlling their behaviour. Too much freedom of thought is a bad thing. Let's constrain the behaviour and ingrain good habits. Now, there is some. I'm sure there's some truth to that actually, but there are also dangers associated with that. I mean, you know, what if the habit you get them ingrained in is like a really sexist one or a really racist one? I mean, they're just going to be stuck in that. They have no ability to get out of it. Secondly, who says that ingraining good habits is incompatible with a liberal approach? It's not. It's entirely complementary to a liberal approach. In fact, you should be getting children to engage in good habits, but you should also be getting them to think about what it is that they're doing and reflecting on that. And in fact, that was precisely Aristotle's view, actually. In fact, one of the habits that you should be getting them into is thinking for themselves. That's a habit that they should be very much have ingrained in them. So it seems to me that although there's a lot of truth to